An American diplomat just told Canada to buy their fighter jets, or they'll fly theirs over our territory whenever they want. And right now, a small European country that made the mistake of buying those same jets is desperately trying to warn us not to make the same mistake they did. I'm sitting here looking at what just happened this week in Arizona, and I need you to understand what we're actually dealing with here. This isn't about military procurement anymore. This is about whether Canada still controls Canadian airspace. Pete Hoekstra, U.S. Ambassador to Canada, standing at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, January 2026. He's delivering what he probably thinks is just standard diplomatic pressure. But what he actually says should terrify every single Canadian who values sovereignty. Here's his exact quote about what happens if Canada doesn't purchase 88 American-built F-35 fighter jets. NORAD would have to be altered. Let me translate that for you. Buy our jets or we'll restructure the entire Continental Defense Agreement to reflect your new subordinate status. But here's where it gets complicated. The ambassador doesn't stop there. He explains that if Canada chose a different aircraft, the United States would need to purchase more F-35s for its own Air Force and fly them more often into Canadian airspace to address threats approaching the U.S. Wait, it gets worse. An American diplomat just announced that if Canada exercises its sovereign right to choose its own military equipment, the United States will respond by increasing unauthorized flights over Canadian territory. This is the part that kept me up last night. Read that again slowly. If we don't buy their product, they'll just fly over our country anyway. That's not diplomacy. That's coercion with a nice acronym attached. Now, what I'm about to show you changes the whole picture. There's a country that already bought these jets. They're living the reality that Canada is being pressured to accept, and they're practically begging us not to make the same mistake. Denmark, a NATO ally, a founding member of the Western Alliance, and right now, they're in crisis mode. Here's what nobody's talking about. Denmark bought the F-35s. They committed to the program. They made the purchase Washington is now demanding Canada make. And the chairman of their Parliamentary Defense Committee just went public with something that should be front-page news in every Canadian newspaper, Rasmus Jarlof, the guy who actually helped make the decision to buy F-35s for Denmark. Here's what he's saying now. They're in for repairs about half the time or even more, so the Americans have all the power of actually destroying our Air Force just by shutting down supplies. Think about what that means. Denmark finds itself in a position where Washington could ground their entire Air Force by simply cutting off replacement parts. That's not a partnership. That's a dependency designed for leverage. But that's not even the real story. Here's what makes Denmark's warning so urgent right now. As Denmark faces threats from the Trump administration over Greenland, they're experiencing exactly what that leverage looks like in practice. The same administration threatening to annex Greenland is the same one controlling whether Denmark's fighter jets can actually fly. Reports are coming in that Denmark has second thoughts about the F-35 purchase. But the country has little choice now that it is their only operational fighter aircraft. They're trapped. And Ambassador Hoekstra is telling Canada to walk right into the same trap. This is the same administration that threatened to annex Greenland. The same president who repeatedly refers to Canada as a potential 51st state. The same White House that views trade agreements as opportunities for extortion rather than partnerships. Documents reveal that when reporters asked Ambassador Hoekstra if he recognized the political implications of Canada choosing the F-35 when many Canadians see the United States itself as a threat, his response was telling, "That's crazy. We're not a threat. Except you literally just threatened to alter our Continental Defense Pact and increase flights over our territory if we don't buy your product." That's not diplomacy. That's exactly what a threat looks like. Here's what's really happening behind the scenes that should concern every Canadian. Vincent Rigby spent over 30 years in diplomatic and military portfolios, most recently served as National Security Advisor to the Trudeau government. Officials are now saying the ambassador's remarks are exactly what they are, clearly a political pressure tactic to force the Canadian government's hand. But here's what should concern you even more than the threat itself. The reality is that they can and will do anything they feel like. If we're in the way, they'll find a way to move us. We've already seen this pattern. Sources are now confirming that American F-15s responded near Calgary after a bomb threat on a German airliner in September. 2 years earlier, an American F-22 shot down a suspicious balloon over Yukon. Those were cooperative actions under NORAD. What Hoekstra is describing is something fundamentally different. Unilateral American operations over Canadian territory, not in partnership, but in substitution for Canadian capability. Now, what I'm about to show you is why the Carney government is seriously considering the Swedish-built Gripen fighter jet. And this changes everything. This isn't about technical specifications, though the Gripen performs exceptionally well in Arctic conditions. This isn't about cost, though the Gripen offers significant savings. This isn't even about the 2021 Defense Department competition where the F-35 dominated on paper. This is about whether Canada will accept permanent dependency on an increasingly unreliable partner, or whether we'll choose equipment that comes without political strings and supply chain blackmail. The latest information shows that Hoekstra tried to dismiss the Gripen option by calling it an inferior product that is not as interchangeable, interoperable as what the F-35 is. But Vincent Rigby, with 3 decades of security experience, offers a different assessment. The Gripen is a highly proficient aircraft used by some of our NATO allies and works well in Arctic conditions. Here's the difference that nobody's talking about. Sweden doesn't threaten to annex its customers. Sweden doesn't talk about making Canada its 51st province. Sweden doesn't use part supply as leverage for unrelated political demands. What Sweden offers is capability without coercion, and Washington knows that makes it dangerous to American interests. Now, here's the number that should be driving this entire conversation. Reports are coming in that 72% of Canadians support incorporating the Gripen into Canada's fighter fleet, either switching completely to the Swedish aircraft or maintaining a mixed fleet of both Gripens and F-35s, according to December polling. Does this change how you see the situation? 72% of Canadians understand something the U.S. ambassador apparently doesn't. Sovereignty matters more than interoperability when your supposed partner keeps threatening to treat you as a subordinate rather than an ally. Andrea Sharon, director of the Centre for Defence and Security Studies at the University of Manitoba, one of Canada's top analytical voices on NORAD, responded to Hoekstra's threats with appropriate caution. Public sniping only benefits our adversaries and risks undermining the credibility of our shared deterrence. But here's what experts need to grapple with. What happens when the deterrence relationship itself becomes the threat to sovereignty? NORAD was built on the principle of partnership, 2 nations working together to defend North America with mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and decision-making authority. What Hoekstra described isn't partnership. It's subordination with a nice acronym attached. Let me walk you through what accepting the F-35 under these conditions actually means for Canada's future. And this is the part that kept me up last night. First, we accept permanent dependency on American part supply. Denmark's experience shows this isn't theoretical. When half your fleet is grounded waiting for American-controlled components, you don't have an air force. You have expensive hangar decorations. Second, we accept that American political considerations will always override Canadian military needs. The Trump administration has already demonstrated willingness to use every economic and military relationship as leverage. Third, we accept the precedent that American threats work, that when Washington demands Canada make purchases, alter policies, or accept conditions, the response should be compliance rather than principled resistance. But that's not even the real story. Fourth, and most critically, we accept that Canadian airspace is actually American airspace with Canadian permission that can be revoked whenever Washington decides our sovereignty is inconvenient. What we're learning is that between January 2026 and whatever decision the Carney government makes in the coming months, something fundamental is being decided about Canada's future. Here's what nobody's talking about. Denmark isn't just experiencing buyer's remorse. They're watching their strategic autonomy evaporate in real time, and the chairman of their defense committee is trying to warn Canada before it's too late. Rasmus Jarlof, one of the decision makers behind Denmark's F-35 purchase. Here's what he posted publicly, and I want you to pay very close attention to this. I don't know if there is a kill switch in the F-35s or not. We obviously cannot take your word for it. As one of the decision makers behind Denmark's purchase of F-35s, I regret it. The USA can certainly disable the planes by simply stopping the supply of spare parts. But wait, it gets worse. Jarlof continues. I can easily imagine a situation where the USA will demand Greenland from Denmark and will threaten to deactivate our weapons and let Russia attack us when we refuse. This isn't speculation from some internet commentator. This is the chairman of Denmark's Parliamentary Defense Committee publicly stating that buying American weapons has become a security risk that Denmark cannot run. Now, what I'm about to show you reveals exactly how this leverage actually works. Sources are now confirming something that happened in March that most Canadians don't know about. The U.S. government took F-35 components stored in Denmark for Danish F-35s and shipped them to Israel. The Danish government acknowledged it had no way to block the U.S. decision, which violated the country's foreign policy for the region. Let me make sure you understand this. Denmark had F-35 parts on Danish soil, purchased with Danish money, for Danish aircraft, and the United States just took them and sent them to Israel. Denmark couldn't stop it. That's not because Denmark is weak. It's because when you buy American F-35s, you don't actually own the spare parts until they're physically installed on the aircraft. They remain U.S. government property. Does this change how you see the F-35 deal? Canada faces the exact same arrangement. Documents reveal that F-35 spare parts are centrally managed by the U.S. government for the benefit of all customers. That's the official line. What that actually means is that spare parts stored on Canadian soil, in Canadian hangars, purchased with Canadian tax dollars, will be U.S. government property that Washington can requisition whenever they want. The Carney government understands what's at stake here. His administration's consideration of the Gripen isn't a rejection of continental defense. It's a rejection of continental dependence. The F-35 decision back in 2021 was made under different political circumstances. The Trump administration's first term seemed like an aberration. Traditional American reliability looked like it would return. But we're not in 2021 anymore. We're in 2026. Watching Denmark desperately search for exit strategies from F-35 dependency, while the U.S. ambassador to Canada openly threatens increased violations of our airspace if we don't comply with American commercial interests. Now, here's where it gets complicated. The choice couldn't be clearer, but let me spell it out anyway. Accept the F-35 and accept that Canadian sovereignty is negotiable whenever American politics shift. Accept that our airspace is really American airspace. Accept that our military will be perpetually dependent on the goodwill of whatever administration controls Washington. Or choose the Gripen. Choose partnership with a country that respects sovereignty rather than threatens it. Choose equipment that works in our conditions without political strings. Choose strategic independence over operational interoperability with a partner that views us as a subordinate. Ambassador Hoekstra says NORAD would have to be altered if Canada doesn't buy American jets. Translation: the Continental Defense Partnership will be restructured to reflect your subordinate status if you exercise sovereign decision-making. He says the U.S. would need to fly more aircraft into Canadian airspace to address threats. Translation: we will increase unilateral operations over your territory whether you consent or not. He insists the Gripen is an inferior product compared to the F-35. Translation: any choice that reduces your dependency on us is by definition inferior. This is the language of empire, not alliance. And the Carney government's consideration of alternatives represents the most significant assertion of Canadian sovereignty in defense procurement in decades. The coming months will tell us a lot about where Canada's headed. What we're learning is that Washington's going to turn up the heat. You'll see it through every channel. Diplomats emphasizing interoperability, defense officials questioning commitment, politicians casting doubt on Canada's alliance credibility. The message will be consistent: buy the F-35 or there will be consequences. But the fundamental question remains unchanged. Will Canada accept that sovereignty is negotiable when American interests are involved? I'm curious what you think about this, because what happens next determines whether Canada still controls Canada. Here's what's really at stake that most analysts are missing. Mark Carney's government has an opportunity to answer the sovereignty question definitively, to tell Washington that threats don't work on independent nations. Officials are now saying that 72% of Canadians already support that answer. They understand that in an era of American unreliability and political volatility, strategic independence isn't optional, it's survival. Denmark tried to warn us. Their Defense Committee chair saw what Canada's facing, and his message was blunt: choose another fighter jet. Right now, Denmark's watching their Air Force capability rise and fall based on whatever mood strikes Washington. And that administration happens to be threatening Danish territory over Greenland. We can take the warning seriously, or we can find out the hard way. Let me show you what Denmark's actually experiencing. Reports are coming in that Denmark deployed F-35s to Greenland amid U.S. threats. The same jets they regret purchasing are now being used to defend against the very country that sold them those jets. Think about that paradox for a second. Denmark is using American-controlled aircraft to defend against American territorial ambitions. And they can only do that as long as Washington keeps supplying the parts that make those aircraft operational. That's not defense capability. That's dependence wrapped in a threat. Now, what I'm about to tell you is why this matters so much right now. The choice ultimately comes down to a simple question that every Canadian needs to answer. Whose airspace is this? If it's ours, we choose our own equipment based on our own strategic needs without American threats determining the outcome. If it's theirs, we buy what we're told and accept whatever conditions come with it. But here's what makes this decision so urgent. This isn't about jets anymore. It's about whether Canada still controls Canada. Documents reveal that the Gripen offers more than just an alternative aircraft. Sweden's Saab is proposing to build Gripens in Canada, create 12,600 jobs in the Canadian aerospace sector, establish sovereign production capability that doesn't depend on American goodwill. What that actually means is that Canada would have the ability to maintain and upgrade its own fighter fleet without Washington's permission, without spare parts leverage, without kill switches or supply chain blackmail. Sources are now confirming that the Gripen achieves mission-capable status 80–90% of the time. The F-35, between 50–60% of the time. Those aren't my numbers. That's from official studies. Cost per flight hour, the latest information shows Gripen costs $8,000, $12,000 USD. The F-35 between $33,000, $50,000 USD, depending on variant. Am I the only one concerned about this? We're being pressured to buy an aircraft that's available less than the alternative and costs 4 times as much to operate. And the primary argument for buying it is that we need to maintain interoperability with a country that's threatening our sovereignty. The coming decision reveals everything about Canada's future trajectory. Not just our fighter fleet, not just NORAD arrangements, but whether Canada will chart an independent course in an increasingly multipolar world, or whether we'll accept permanent subordinate status to an increasingly erratic southern neighbor. Mark Carney understands the stakes. His government's consideration of the Gripen isn't a rejection of continental defense. It's a rejection of the idea that defending the continent requires accepting American domination. What we're learning is that Washington will frame any move toward strategic independence as abandoning our alliances. But here's what they won't tell you. Sweden is a NATO member. Swedish Gripens operate with NATO forces. Canadian Gripens would maintain full interoperability with our NATO obligations. The only thing we'd lose is American leverage over Canadian decision-making. And that's exactly what Washington can't accept. Here's what happens if Canada chooses the Gripen. We establish domestic production capability. We create thousands of high-skilled jobs. We maintain an aircraft fleet that actually works in Arctic conditions. We preserve our ability to make sovereign decisions without American veto power. Reports are coming in that other countries are watching Canada's decision very carefully. Portugal halted plans to purchase the F-35 because of Trump's unpredictable foreign policy. Switzerland is facing public calls to rethink its F-35 order amid reliability concerns. The F-35 program isn't just experiencing Canadian skepticism. It's experiencing a crisis of confidence across allied nations who are realizing that dependency on American systems means accepting American political control. Denmark learned this the hard way. They're living proof of what happens when you tie your national defense to a supplier who views military equipment as leverage for political demands. Where do you think this goes from here? Because I'll tell you what I think. If Canada chooses the F-35 under these conditions, we're not just buying fighter jets. We're accepting that American threats work. That sovereignty is negotiable. That Canadian airspace belongs to whoever has the spare parts. But if Canada chooses the Gripen, we're sending a different message. We're saying that Canada makes its own decisions, that our sovereignty isn't for sale, that threats from supposed allies won't determine our strategic direction. The stakes couldn't be higher, the choice couldn't be clearer, and the decision that gets made in the coming months will define Canada's relationship with the United States for decades to come. This isn't about technical specifications anymore. It's about whether Canada will remain an independent nation or accept status as an American protectorate. What am I missing here? Let me know what you think about this in the comments below.